Firstly, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, whichever time zone you're joining us from. My name is George Wright, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the head of social media here at MyGWork, the LGBTQ plus business community. If you've not heard of us before, we're a platform for professionals, graduates, inclusive employers to come together and build networks and access fantastic content like this, over 100,000 inclusive jobs based around the world, news regularly, and other sort of events and cultural intake. And if you want to find out more about what we're doing, you can head over to our website, mygwork.com, where you can connect with our fantastic panel who are praying with you today and find out more about the events that we have coming up. We're also on social media. If you're enjoying this session, do feel free to get in touch with us on social media. It's at mygwork, nice and simple. And we will endeavor to get back to you as soon as we can. So nonetheless, as I said at the beginning, happy Lunar New Year. Whether you were celebrating or keen to learn more, we are delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel this afternoon to explore more the wealth of being Asian and LGBTQ plus and exploring the wealth of opportunity between people sort of celebrating Chinese New Year at the time. Sorry, I just heard a pop up there. Nonetheless, I think I should introduce our panel, and I'll just ask our panel to tell us a little bit about who they are and where they're joining us from, and then we can get straight into our questions. I'll start at the top. We're joined by Amy Huang. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. 新年快乐. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat, so thank you for taking the time. My name is Amy Huang. I'm a director of technology at Marsh McLennan, overseeing a team of 40 team members covering 90 plus offices, 6,000 colleagues at Marsh McLennan. So happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Amy. We're also joined by Scott Yu.
Happy Lunar New Year to everyone as well. My name is Scott Liu. I'm based in London right now. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm Australian. So I previously worked in Sydney for 2.5 years, moved to New York, and have been living in London since. I'm a product specialist in our Macquarie Asset Management division within Macquarie, and I focus on infrastructure debt products and private credit products more broadly.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Scott. We're also joined by James Chang.
I heard someone said it in Mandarin, so 恭喜发财 in 新年快乐 in Cantonese. Want to make sure to start with that one. I am actually from Zimmer Biomet, a medical technology organization that spans in 25 countries. We have over 20,000 employees worldwide. I'm their global head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Zimmer Biomet.
Very much. We're also joined by Erica Lowe Jones from Yahoo, who is sponsoring this session. You can find out more about Yahoo over on their profile on MyGWork. Erica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. 恭喜发财, and that's in Shanghainese. My family is Shanghainese. I'm a director of product design from Yahoo Sports, Yahoo Fantasy Sports, and my team oversees all the products and experiences for Yahoo Sports and Fantasy. So glad to be here today. I'm calling from the United States.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erica. And finally, last but not least, Mike Huang, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, sure. Happy Lunar New Year. 恭喜发财, 恭喜发财, 恭喜发财. So that's all in Mandarin, Cantonese, and then Shanghainese. I grew up in Shanghai, moved to London in 2005, worked for HSBC. So I'm a trader there, and my specialty is securitized products. I'm happy to be on board. Thank you.
Fantastic. Let's kick off our panel with a nice and easy question to start us all off. And Mike, perhaps if I stay with you, if that's all right, with asking to our panel, but come to you first, Mike. What does Lunar New Year mean to you?
So Lunar New Year usually means to me it's like, gathering of families. And then there's also red pockets, like where I grew up. It's usually your grandparents, your parents, they give you sort of cash in a red pocket and sort of like, just to spend the time with your loved ones. And also a lot of good food. They usually, like, you have a big feast. That would be yesterday, usually. That would be Chinese New Year's Eve. Depends which part of Lunar New Year's Eve. Depends on which part of region you're from, so it may be different. But like usually in Shanghai, like we have a dish, like a fish dish, basically in Chinese or in Mandarin, that means like something like you've got something surplus. So you always want to end the year with surplus and sort of welcome the year with abundance in that way.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Does anyone else on the panel wish to share what Lunar New Year means to them? Amy, maybe if you wanted to go to.
Sure. This is probably my favorite holiday because it's being with friends and family. There's shopping involved, fun traditions, and lots of fantastic food. So it is one of my favorite. It's the largest human migration. Pre-COVID, you could actually see from space all of the people who celebrate traveling across the world. It's phenomenal, and it's celebrated in multiple countries like Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Mongolia. So this is truly a lunar celebration that is inclusive of a lot of Asians in the world.
Are there any particular traditions that perhaps stand out to you, or sort of favorite traditions for you at all?
For me, is eating
Yeah.
dumplings, particularly. They're shaped like ingots, gold. So it symbolizes wealth. I do have to say that it's changed a little bit for me since becoming vegetarian. So there's a lot of things that we're supposed to eat, like the fish, that we don't eat anymore. But we do make the best veggie dumplings in the world. So we'll make some for you.
Excellent. James, what does Lunar New Year mean to you?
Well, this year is going to be uniquely special, being that my nephew is coming in next next month, actually. So new to the family, so it means a lot to me as a newborn coming to our household. But more than anything else, I would say is the recognition of how our culture has developed across different countries, different regions. But when it comes to history, we've been around for a long time, to say the least, when it comes to our culture. So that's a little bit of the history and heritage.
Excellent. I can't wait to find out more about that as we get into our panel. Scott, what does Lunar New Year mean to you?
I think food is definitely high up on the list, but it's an excuse to eat as much as food as possible and also just get together with friends. And being away from home, and I think, it's been, given the pandemic, it's been over, 3 years since I visited my family. It's a reminder to sort of, stay in touch with people and connect with different relatives. So not just your, my parents, but also, extended family members as well. So it's just a nice way to keep in touch with people, and it forces, we're all so busy in our lives. It just forces us to be quite grounded and, make the time to, connect back with our relatives.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Erica, finally, what does Lunar New Year mean to you?
Piggybacking on kind of all the themes that people are talking about here, being in the United States and having my dad's family here as well. My dad is one of 7. Everyone kind of came over at the same time, settled in the same area at the same time, started having children at the same time. And so for us, it's really about family and bringing those traditions to our children now. And that's a really big deal. And so for us, the Lunar New Year gathering has always been a big thing. My mom usually hosts it. It's in her home pre-COVID, and she makes a lot of food, many dishes that symbolize a number of things that people have already talked about. But it's really gathering and honoring each other and honoring our culture and our ancestors. Being able to pass it down has been really important for all of us.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I guess out of curiosity then, and moving on from sort of that, you sort of make that point and said perhaps sort of being in diaspora. I wondered how do you sort of balance both your cultural heritage and your ancestry against essentially being in the diaspora and holding on to that? Erica, do you mind if I stay with you for that question?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that since childhood, that has always been part of my life, thinking about who I am, both as an American and as a Chinese person in America. And for me, it's starting from when I was very young, learning about the migration of the Chinese in America, about what others have had to go through, where people came from, in the different parts of China, and then also then broadly expanding that out later on, doing work for an Asian American magazine called Hyphen. And so having more awareness of the Asian diaspora, having more broad experiences and thinking about everybody's shared voices and their unique experiences has been a really important and special thing.
Thank you very much. And I guess I open this up to the rest of our panel in terms of that balance between, you know, retaining that cultural heritage and sort of making sure that you're honoring that. I don't know if anyone else had any thoughts on perhaps how they manage that balance and how they express it.
For me personally, I would say I gave up on trying to balance it. It's about integration, right? It's part of us. We've learned to integrate most of this into our lives. So I would say for me personally, it would be a matter of remembering to honor what has been established. And again, trusting ourselves and being confident in what we've built, where we are currently today.
I 100% agree with that. And seeing the rise in anti-Asian violence in the US has been, and the world really has been particularly jarring. And I think a lot of our history has been erased. I'm very fortunate to have been a Chinese studies major in college. My parents were not thrilled about that. But you learn things that, you know, like, why are there Chinese restaurants everywhere? Like, how did that even happen in South Dakota? Well, there were laws passed in the United States specifically barring the Chinese as a race from entering the United States and holding property. And that's why there are Chinatowns, because those were the only places people were allowed to live. And so when you think about, like, how do we have all these restaurants? Where did that come from? What are fortune cookies? Fortune cookies are Japanese. Why are they in my Chinese takeout? Well, during the internment, the Japanese immigrants of the United States, or Japanese citizens, were put in internment camps. And so the Chinese had taken the fortune cookie and kept that going and made it part of the takeout. So there's lots of aspects of our history that we take for granted that really show that, like James has said, we've been here this entire time, and we are Americans, at least, you know, for me anyway, and that our history is important.
Thank you so much for that insight. And I guess then, as a follow-up question to you both, building on what you were talking about, I'm curious if you have any advice then, both for Asian people in the diaspora, not perhaps about balancing, but then perhaps retaining, keeping a hold onto that culture and embracing that and remembering that you are a part of that, but also for people that aren't Asian, outside, you know, allies and people that want to make sure that they're sort of being respectful in that way. Do you have any advice in that regard?
Personally, I would always tell people, don't overdo it. Be honest and authentic and ask and learn and we can all continue to learn. I still learn on a daily basis about my culture, my history, and my ancestors. And it's not limited to whether it's just the Asian culture in general, but when you think about the intersectionality of the LGBT population, we have diversity within our LGBT communities, right? So when you think about that, how does that work? Well, it's, again, ultimately being authentic and confident with yourself, right? Then how do you give back to the world when it comes to that?
Excellent, thank you. And Amy, if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I saw Erica. Erica, would you like to go?
Oh, you know, I was just going to say, you know, a lot of it too, I feel like, is speaking out about things. And so naming it as you see it, educating yourself. For me, I feel fine educating others. I know that a lot of the burden becomes on people of color at times, but for me, education has always been part of my learning experience, my learned experience. And so being able to share that with others in an open and frank way. Again, like, my lens is through the lens of a parent. And so for my daughter, who's 8, I've been talking to her about our shared histories since she was about 4 years old, and also kind of the struggles of all of us of being here in the US and what does that mean as a collective. And so having that awareness as both a person of color and as an ally is something that I feel like is an active part of my engagement with the community and others.
That's perfect. And I want to thank everyone on this call for joining, because you are doing your part. You've taken the time to join in, to listen to our stories, to take in what we're saying, to comment really great comments in the chat. And there, I've kind of grown up thinking like I've had 3 strikes against me, right? I'm Asian, I'm a woman, like I'm LGBT, I'm in a relationship with a woman, like how am I supposed to be successful and survive, especially in tech, let alone corporate America? And one thing, and I'm proud of everyone on this panel, is that one, we are here and representing and saying out loud who we are and saying out loud what our situation is, and not being afraid, because it is hard. A lot of people are still closeted. A lot of people are not out at work. A lot of people are uncomfortable. There are countries where you are punished, right? So you cannot be who you are. And in Asia, Taiwan is the only country that has legalized same-sex marriage. No other country allows that. And Singapore is actually illegal to be LGBTQ. And so we were really proud at MMC. We were able to take one of our Singapore colleagues who's not out to his family, but he could be out to us, his company, his ERG, his people that he works with every day. And we were able to fly him out to Philadelphia for a conference where he got to be with 6,000 other LGBTQ leaders in the world. And that like blew his mind, and just be that for ourselves and for, people around the world.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Amy. And that's such a fact. I can't imagine, how, as you say, mind blowing that must be to be able to sort of have an experience like that. Thank you so much for your thoughts there. Coming over to you, Scott, out of curiosity, as said, as balancing that idea of sort of being, as said, Chinese diaspora, in your own experience, sort of being Australian and now based in the UK, what has sort of been your journey in that regards of retaining your culture and identity and making sure that you're sort of, celebrating it appropriately? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's always, when I grew up in Australia, I've always had, ties back to my family, and then, you're brought up in like sort of a westernized community, and then when your sort of relatives from China who came, they're like, oh, you're like a, very typical Western person. You don't even, look Chinese or something. You sort of go, oh, so where do I sort of fit in? Because, your friends, it was just like you don't know where you belong. And then I think as I grew up and sort of traveled around, New York and UK, you started to see that, I wasn't the only person that was sort of facing this thing. And, meeting new people from New York and UK, you're like, oh, different people actually had similar experiences, and then just sort of sharing stories. I just ended up getting comfortable that, there's, as James said, you don't really have to, find that balance. It's more about integrating it. And, we ended up becoming a sort of new sort of identity where it's just like a merge between the two. And I think that's just sort of how I became comfortable with who I am. It's just like, I have Chinese roots. I grew up in Australia, and I celebrate both parts of it. So I'm quite happy to be who I am in that sort of respect. And yeah, I find it pretty cool actually. It's a fun topic of conversation.
Would you say then, to an extent, that perhaps that feeling, I hesitate to use the word imposter syndrome, but perhaps if the feeling sort of similar in that regard of trying to, I guess, that journey of deciding or figuring out where you sort of stood and holding on to it, would you describe it like that?
Yeah, I guess so. It was more like, it's like, I remember, like, even the way I dress, like when my relatives came over, like, oh, that's very different. That's very, very Western of you. Or I think I remember I accidentally wrote backwards, just by accident wrote backwards from the other side of the exercise book. And then I remember my primary school teacher saying, we don't start, we don't do this here, sort of thing. It was just, very mind blowing, like, where do I sort of fit in, sort of thing. And yeah, it does have that sort of ring to it. And I think in the end, you just got to accept it. And it's just it's a sort of a life journey. Just it's sort of a life journey, just trying to figure out how to integrate the two. But I think as I got to know a lot more people, like people on these panels and so forth, it's really sort of solidified my identity as being both, being Asian and Australian at the same time.
Thank you so much for that insight. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm really, really grateful. Mike, I guess just wrapping up sort of this aspect of it from your own experiences of being sort of living and working in China and then living and working abroad, has this been a very sort of similar experience for you compared to our panelists, or what's your experience been?
I think it's similar in certain ways, but a lot of it is quite different because I spent most of my teenage years back in Shanghai and then grew up in mainland China, which, as we all know, it's a communist country. And, coming to UK after I finished uni, because HSBC hired me out of China and got the chance to see the world and meet new people. So at the very beginning, I think what James said earlier with regarding on the being your true self, being authentic, it's very important because it did take me quite a while to adjust to it, coming from an Eastern culture, working full-time in a Western culture, and later on I did part-time master, and you sort of try a bit too hard to fit in, because at the very beginning, starting, in an investment bank, you watch all these movies, you want to be like them, you act like them. But then really, if you look at the movies, you don't really have that many role models that you can refer to. Even, at this day and age, it takes a little while when you see that Asian trader or that Asian investment banker, whether female or male, in the movies, for that sake. But in reality, if you go onto a trading floor in New York or go onto a trading floor in London, you will see a lot of Asian background, people who originally from India, originally from China, Japan, Korea, sitting on the floor. So sometimes you got to wonder, when will the society actually see me? So that's when sort of things move away and become out of my own shell a little bit, to be a little bit more outspoken, speak the truth. If you see things, I remember when I was growing up, there's certain parts, when you see accents, sometimes you help the people, but then you don't necessarily help them too much because you worry they may come back to you, ask for, they may ask for money or something like that in China. Something does happen like that. But then now living in Western world, then you really see something not right, you actually speak up and then give them solutions and try to say, I would like to do things this way or that way to promote the different culture, the differences. When you see the difference, when you tell people why it is different, then people, when you try to communicate, then people do listen and people can sort of relate. Eventually, we're human beings, one way or another. You may have different preference, but that doesn't really change the essence of it, right? So I think it goes back to the Lunar New Year, you talk about togetherness and love and things, what people who matter to you. And so I think that's something, the similarity I can, always relate to in the end.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And out of curiosity, from your own experiences at being LGBTQ plus in China and then being LGBTQ plus sort of in places like the UK and beyond, have there been any major differences? What kind of has that experience been like for you?
I do think there's a pretty big difference. I think Amy put it very, correctly earlier. Asia, especially East Asia, the culture is very sort of conservative. And then when you talk about families, when you talk about your partners, you're not necessarily just talking about partners. You're talking about offsprings. It's almost like, if you don't have kids, if you don't bear kids, it's almost like one of the worst things you can do to the family name, because no one's going to carry your family's going on forward, right? Even if you're dead, no one knows. So that sort of culture is sort of engraved on it. Imagine you grew up in that culture. You grew up there up until 22. Even if you left, it's sort of it still lingers around, right? So it all depends on how you decide to live your life, I guess, especially in a different part of the world. But still in China, when I talk to my peers, things are getting better. I do think so. I think a lot of multinational companies, they've set up different policies. And because they're multinational companies, they have certain standards, they have the boards to ask for. And, they actually execute certain, better benefits for same-sex partnerships and things like that. But on the ground, on the legal perspective, on the country perspective, it still needs a lot of work. It needs like every one of us. And that's why I feel like, it is important to give back when you can. And from my perspective, there are certain charities that you can donate to, specifically on the ground, doing the grassroots work locally in mainland China, in different parts of Southeast Asia where the laws may not be, that good, or sometimes even be criminal acts, right? Like Singapore. So from my perspective, I think, that's one of the ways to give back. But yeah, a long way to go.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. Coming back to you, Amy, if that's all right. I believe in sort of hitting on that idea of being Asian and LGBTQ+. If I've understood correctly, I believe you also celebrate Lunar New Year with sort of like an assembled, like chosen family that were of LGBTQ+ people. I just wondered if you could tell us maybe a little bit more about that and what that looks like for you.
Absolutely. So I love a good wedding banquet. I love a giant round table, multiple giant round tables filled with food and lobster and rice and noodles and dumplings. And so I wasn't able to travel. And it's not actually that long now that I think about it. My family's in New Jersey. I'm in DC. So for a while, I was not going back to New Jersey for New Year's. And so I would assemble all my friends and in DC, and we would have a Lunar New Year celebration together at Da Hong Pao, which is closed. Sorry, James. But and I would get to throw my big wedding banquet, my big New Year's feast with, the people that I really look up to and I stand on their shoulders. One of them is a presidential appointee for Obama, and she's a Black lesbian with her partner. I also have another Obama presidential appointee who was with Department of Defense and the first female transgender presidential appointee. So there's a lot of, people and mentors at my Zen masters there. So just like great people that I love and cherish and bring together, and we eat lots of food together, and it's a fantastic time. And so it's, you bring up that part where you have your family and you love them, and you have a chosen family of people who support you and surround you all your life, and hold on to them because they're important to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that, Amy. I really appreciate it. Going back, I guess, kind of to, and I think, Mike, you hit on this a bit sort of in your last sort of response. It's very clear that there are very different expectations placed on LGBTQ plus people and Asian LGBTQ plus people as we look at sort of intersectional expectations. I see we have a couple of comments in the chat with similar differences in legal and social expectations. And I just wondered, I said we've heard a couple from Mike, if anyone on the panel wanted to share any others perhaps, and advice they have on things we can sort of do about this, as both supporting the Asian LGBTQ plus diaspora community and sort of LGBTQ plus community in Asia. I don't know if anyone wanted to lead on that.
I would say one thing is, don't do it by yourself, first and foremost, whatever it is. Ultimately, there's plenty of resources, people out there. This panel, as an example, is one opportunity to see others, right? So the journey of challenges that we're talking about, cultures, countries, rules, laws, ultimately, you're not alone. That's something I want to say as a message, right? We have communities. And the communities that you can tap into, whether it's for guidance, whether it's to be an activist, whether it is to be someone who's just learning, you have community. So never feel alone, never feel like you're in this by yourself. And as you can see, you have representation across the globe. I remember my time when for me, I've traveled and worked in over 36 different countries. So having certain countries where I was prepped by the company to say, well, we need you to be careful here because in this country you might not be safe. Well, guess what? I can still be me without having to always say everything out loud, right? But key is, am I confident? Do I have a support network? And am I prepared wherever I'm at? Because in general, it's a crazy world right now, to be very, very fair. We have to be diligent, but we also have to be human. We have to live. So that'd be my recommendation, is to lean into your community and trust your network.
James. I appreciate that. I posted a link from the Asian American Psychological Association on some Asian LGBTQ resources that are out there. You know, I think the rise in anti-Asian violence has been palpable. I was myself harassed in DC. We've had a number of businesses with violence and attacked. So this is very real. I didn't want to jump ahead necessarily, but I think that since the topic is here, there's some things that we can do to support our Asian colleagues and our LGBTQ colleagues, because for me, I'm like, I don't know why I'm being attacked. Is it like I'm Asian or queer or a woman or like what's happening out here right now? But for me, like one of the things that came across was like we were, you know, the organization was planning a Walktober. Well, Asians aren't comfortable being outside at this point these days, right? So let's not do anything that's like, oh, everyone go outside. We're you know, just not safe. I bought myself and my family all of these alarms, right, in case there's any kind of thing that's happening. There's also this really great organization called Hollaback that teaches you about being an upstander, right? So you're not being a bystander, you're being an upstander, and you're there. And if you see something, and there are safe ways to approach and possibly help out if you can, or things that you can do in those cases. So, and I'll post links also to like Stop AAPI Hate, as well as the U.S. Justice Department has some support on that. But it is a tough time. I mean, I think that I've been hiding out in my house basically this entire time. I've not gone anywhere. I miss my big banquets. I miss my friends. I have not left the house.
Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button there. Thank you so much for sharing those resources and your own personal experiences, Amy. I appreciate particularly talking about, you know, risks to yourself because of intersectional communities is you can sometimes be very uncomfortable with things. So thank you. I really appreciate you sharing those experiences with us. Erica, I don't know if you had any thoughts on this topic that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what Amy was saying about Hollaback, I also wanted to shout them out too. I took their upstander training, and it has helped me in situations. And it has helped me help others in situations. And so they have very tactical, very smart ways to do safe intervention for others. And I'm glad that it has worked. There was an incident where I was somewhere where I saw a woman being harassed and was able to immediately recognize that just through across the parking lot, through her face, her body manner, and the aggressive manner of the person that was harassing her. And so being able to think very quickly and use those easy tactics that they have taught us was something I was able to help extricate this person from a situation. And if you think about our involvement in our communities, our everyday lives, myself thinking about myself as an Asian woman, but also as an ally to the LGBTQ plus community, thinking about ways that I can create safe spaces for others is very important. It's very top of mind. And part of that is also showing in leadership that these are spaces that we care about, people we care about, and making sure that those people are honored and respected.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Erica. I appreciate it. James, if I can just come back to you quickly. I think we've touched on this a couple of times throughout this panel. I think there is an overwhelming message come through about intersectionality, you know, as Amy said as well, and I know some other panelists contribute this idea of sort of different identities building up. And I wondered from your experiences, you know, how do different levels of intersectional identities interact with one another and the different challenges these present?
Absolutely. So I'll first kind of identify some surface layer intersectionalities of myself. I'm a second generation Chinese American who was raised by immigrant family, socioeconomically challenged. I'm a veteran of the Air Force. I am a gay man. I have an invisible disability. So having to say none of that's bad. That's all part of me. I'm proud of it. And being able to share that externally so others in the organizations that you are with can see it's normal to be you, right? And being proud of it. So first off, I would say it's it's not about, again, I said it earlier, not to separate each of those components, not about balancing. It's about integration and honoring authenticity of who you are. And then from there, giving confidence to the community they're around, because that's one of the biggest challenge. We don't see a lot of us at very senior levels at times in organizations. And I actively make sure that I'm out there representing one way or another. And I'm, to be very fair, I'm in a very unique industry. I'm in what we as medical technology. It is, and specifically in orthopedics, where 90% of the population are men as orthopedic surgeons out there, and mostly of one demographic. And it is, again, a matter of representation. So yes, representation matters. Having a seat at the table matters. Sponsoring those who does not have an opportunity matters. And then ultimately being loud and proud in a way where it's, again, honoring your past, your identity, but also empowering others to be themselves. And I'll be, like I said before, I've gone to countries where being gay is not safe, but does not mean I need to hide. It does not mean I can't show up and perform at the best of the levels. So it is about coming in, being strong, being authentic, and again, giving back to the community in whatever way you can.
Thank you so much, James. I love the energy with that. It's really, really powerful, actually. And I think it's a message that you can take and dissect. You know, even I said, I appreciate this is a panel about being Asian and LGBTQ+, but as you point out, it goes much further beyond that. And I think that's, you know, that's a message we can all take from. Thank you. I see we've got a lot of questions coming in the chat. Can I just ask, guys, if you're sending questions in, would you mind sending them to the Q&A box? Just so that way there's a greater chance that they won't get lost in the chat, and we will definitely come to some of those in a bit. No worries, don't worry, Ryan. It's just to make sure that everyone's questions can be seen. I don't want to miss anyone out where possible. Thank you very much for that. Coming back to this, I said we're really starting to look at, you know, my keen interest in this panel, and something when I set out to ask myself when we were setting up this panel, what do we really want to achieve with this panel, is particularly, you know, often we just hear, I think, and as James sort of pointed out, we don't think about intersectionality sometimes when we look at these issues. We think, you know, what are the issues for the Asian community? What are the issues for the LGBTQ+ community? What are they, and so on and so forth. And I think it's a great opportunity to sort of explore these a little bit more. And I'm interested to hear from all of you. We're all LGBTQ+ in the workplace and in business. And I wondered, out of curiosity, from your own experiences, your own perspective, if you had any thoughts on what we can do to tackle discrimination in the workplace, ensure that workplaces are inclusive for, you know, people of color, for the LGBTQ+ community, and making sure that's intersectional. Scott, I don't know if maybe you had any thoughts or wanted to start us off on that.
Yeah, I'll start off by sort of saying the importance of allies. So when I sort of started work and, you know, come into an industry, you know, in banking, I was like, you know, I didn't know how I should, you know, present myself. Do I need to be a bit more conservative? Like, there was a whole sort of, you know, preconception of what I needed to be before I started. But then I sort of thought to myself, you know, I need to be who I am and so forth, and you know, bring my whole self to work, because that's the only way I'm going to flourish. I don't want to be like in university, where I essentially was closeted for the whole time during university, because I was so scared about how friends would think about it, and how, you know, my parents would react and so forth. But then, you know, just coming to work, and the first day, and I remember this quite clearly, I saw one of the most senior directors just having, you know, a badge, like, I actually have it here, it's like diversity inclusion or something, and, you know, he had one that sort of said, you know, pride, you know, ally, and I was like, this is like it was actually sort of like an older Asian man, which sort of you know, sort of reminded me of like my father. I was like, oh, my father would definitely, you know, be against this. So I sort of had this preconception of that, saying, you know, oh, I better be careful around him, because I'm not sure how he would react to the way I am. But then I saw he had that badge. I was like, oh, okay, this changes things. And just knowing that there are, there's people out there that's going to support you, knowing there's a support network out there, has definitely helped me come around at work. And if I sort of compare myself to how I was at university, I am way more open, and I tend to, be able to foster deeper relationships with stakeholders and all my colleagues, because I'm able to talk about things that, very comfortably. And I ended up figuring out that I'm quite an oversharer, as opposed to being, quite reserved back when I was in university. So, yeah, I think definitely the importance of allies, showing the support and on a more active basis is definitely very important.
Thank you so much, I really, really appreciate it. And Mike, if I can maybe come to you on that question. So we know some studies suggest that, the LGBTQ plus in China, less than sort of 15% of people are out to close friends or family. And so from your experience of sort of living in China and then living abroad, what do you think we can do to try and make workplaces more inclusive, and the importance of that?
Yeah, sure. I probably will start with sharing a little bit more of my own experience first. It's very much similar to Scott. Coming started in a financial institution, at the very beginning, I sort of like overthink quite a little bit, and then more like, what I have read the book from Liar's Poker or something like that, how you behave, how you shout over the phone, possibly over to your brokers and things like that, not to behave certain ways. And always your colleagues, especially in London, people will ask you, how are you? They actually ask you, what have you been doing over the weekend? And then at that time, like, that's when I have really put my math hat on, and then really think what sort of pronouns I have to use, like what I actually did versus what I told them. But then later on, day after day, week after week, month after month, one thing you realize that there's so many different lies I had to catch up with. And then that goes back to being, authentic self. And really own it. And then when I first taught someone, one of my colleagues sitting close to me, about like what I actually did, specifically mentioned him rather than her, and then there's no reaction. And then that's when I realized, wait a second, I'm living in London, things were different, and people don't necessarily care that much. And then you gradually you sort of raise your confidence level, and then be more visible within the organization. And sort of speak up at chances, and when you talk to the senior management, talk to the board members, and make a case for yourself, make a case for the minority you represent, and that sort of engraved to their sort of corporate DNA. They sort of get idea, and they will sort of pass the message on to further to sort of enhance our sort of agendas or things we want to promote. And it's important, I think, like, whenever these days, when I look at the juniors coming through the bank ranks, they're very confident. They're very, like, open about what they have done, what they're doing, and really, like, they really don't overthink about it. So I guess, like, one of the tips to do would be stop overthinking about things. A lot of times it's in you sort of, create the old shadow for yourself. And if you can step out of it, and things can be a lot easier, and also like be authentic, just so that everything will be easier, because you're always true to yourself, and people actually relate to you better, and you don't have to put a mask on anymore. But also going back, saying about China, I have been away from the country for like 16, 17 years. Even my parents don't live in Shanghai anymore. They actually moved to New York about 10 years ago. So even though, like, my connection to the country is not a lot, but it is the place where I grew up, I do still have quite a few good friends there. And things are changing at a very slow pace, but there are venues people can go out to. There are venues like people can have a drink, like, LGBT, like gay bars and things like that in Shanghai or other parts of China as well. But there are certain things that it's quite difficult. That's where, like, I think everyone on this channel will sort of realize gradually is the privilege we actually have. A lot of people living in these areas actually do not have resources. They don't know about, such a great network like my G work actually give opportunities to. So when you do see people like that, when you do meet them in these locations, when you go on holidays and stuff, talk to them. When you see them, they need help, or they can reach out, try not to think you live in a metropolitan city, you don't talk to anyone, you just walk your way. Reach out, talk to them, hear their story, tell your story, and pass on, like, give your, and that small gestures, that does speak a lot. And my own experience when I was traveling in India, it did help people in a small way. But we start from the small steps, and then gradually we get stronger.
Hey, Mike, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you see stuff all the time, right? So I was on a panel, June Pride, and one of my panelists was talking about what a really difficult time they had transitioning at the organization. I reached out afterwards. I found out what was going on with her. I had some connections with the other parts of the company and found a different part of the company that she could work in. She has since moved to Chicago, has a great team that she loves, is really thriving. And you can make that difference for people in your organization. You can make that difference for people in your community. And it's just like really fantastic. I want to add on to the fact that, ERGs are great. And so I did post, and I'll post again. It was posted in the Q&A, but I'll post again. There's Human Rights Campaign has establishing an employee resource group. But for me, the key to DEI at an organization must come from the leadership level. They must speak it, they must say it, they must commit to it. They must commit to it with time, treasure, and resources, right? It's not a volunteer thing. And I've done D&I as a volunteer from the side of my desk, and I don't get to be James, head of DEI, making real impacts for the company. And they will see it not only in their colleague engagement, they will also see it in the bottom line. And we have proof of that, because what Mike is talking about, this covering, this pretending, costs a company money. And it causes people to leave. And these are things that organizations cannot afford to do any longer.
Thank you so much for that, Amy. And that's such a valid point, as said. And thank you, Mike, for the small shout out to my duo there. And it is absolutely correct. We see time and time again, when you invest in making sure people can bring their whole selves to work, you do get their attention. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just conscious of time, and I see we do have some Q&A questions. So I think I'm just going to move us on slightly, if that's all right, to bring us back to looking at the Lunar New Year, particularly as an LGBTQ plus person. And just wondering if as I said, we've heard a lot of stories from our panel about your own experiences and what Lunar New Year means to you. But I'm just curious if you have any advice for our audience or attendees or others, perhaps on being LGBTQ plus at Lunar New Year, and sort of advice on sort of navigating some of those challenges. Erica, do you mind if I come to you first, if that's all right?
Yeah, and I will speak from the allies' perspective again. And I think creating, I'll go back to creating safe spaces, whether it is in your workspace, or if it is in your home, or amongst your friends and family members. We have family members that are LGBTQ+. And so for us, it is also honoring them as who they are. We've spoken a lot about intersectionality, and each of us are multifaceted. We are interesting human people. And so being able to look and see and honor each other in that way is really critical, and being outward about it. I think as an ally for me, and again, thinking about myself as who I am in all these different spaces, and in the workspace, making sure that I am seen as an ally. I'm in mid-level. I am not an executive, but I feel like I can make changes for people in ways that honor each of them in specific ways, and that's critical. So again, just wrapping up what I was saying, but creating spaces, honoring others, and really thinking about how to do that in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Thank you so much for that. Scott, I know you kind of hinted at earlier. I'm just curious if you could tell us perhaps a little bit more about your experience with being LGBTQ plus in your family, and kind of how you've navigated that.
Yeah, so a bit of background for myself is, so my dad still doesn't know, and to this day, because I think back when there was the plebiscite to legalize gay marriage in Australia, I told him that I voted yes, and to this day, I think like it was almost 10 years ago, he still wouldn't let that go. He was like, "Oh, you better pray to the gods that you did something wrong." And I think there was this time where he made me, wouldn't let me hang up the phone or something, because until I said admitted I was wrong and so forth. So to this day, he still doesn't know. I accidentally came up to my mum because I was defending my decision to vote yes. And so she doesn't like to talk about it. She's come a long way. It takes time. I think she'll get there, but I feel like I can, the way we sort of celebrate Lunar New Year, like, a lot of conversations end up talking about, who's, when you're going to get a girlfriend, and so forth. And with my dad, I just still laugh about how he still doesn't know. With my mum, I feel like I've come a long way with my mum. So I feel like, what people can do is try to push the boundaries a bit. Like, I can see that a lot of people before me, they've pushed the boundaries for me, and I feel like I can help continue push the boundaries for more people by sort of, helping, my mum get educated on these issues. Like, it's a two-way street. She's grown up in a different environment, so I just need to teach her, it's not wrong to be gay. And I think, with her, I sort of feel like in these sort of situations, it's like reminding her, unfortunately, I won't be bearing kids for you, but you have 3 other children that can help you bear kids. I'm happy with my partner, and perhaps maybe understanding that, talking to other people, she might be comfortable sharing one day, hopefully, that her son's also gay and it's actually okay. And if you think about it logically, it's it makes sense and so forth. So I think just what I can say to other people is try to push the boundaries. It's at times it could be quite fun if you like confrontation and you want to put people on the spot and see how to respond. Funny in hindsight, not so funny when it actually happens, but yeah, that's my story.
So good, Scott. And I just quick before we wrap up that I came out in high school and my dad was totally fine. And my dad is very well read. And so he gave me a copy of Ann Chi-min's book, Red Azalea, which is a lesbian story in Cultural Revolution China to a high schooler. I mean, like my dad is like amazing. My mom grew up Catholic in Taiwan, very not comfortable, very unhappy. There's a lot of screaming. There continued to be screaming for many years. When I got married to my wife, she would not come to the wedding and had to be tied up and put into the car. And she cried the entire wedding. So all of her family pictures, she's like really just hysterical. So then when my wife and I divorced, when you don't get a red envelope when you're married. So when we divorced, I kind of became a child again, and I had not gotten a red envelope from my mom for many, many years, but she did give me a red envelope for the first time in many, many years after my divorce. And she's like, my little name's written on it. And I will keep this and treasure it forever because like she acknowledges me as her child, brings me back into the fold. She still has a hard time, but she's gotten so much better, and I'm just so proud of her. And this is a struggle, and it is grief for them. You're not the person they had thought that you were going to be and that they hoped. And so that grief is like trying to process, okay, like Scott said, Scott's doing great. Scott is happy. He's successful. He's doing fantastic. Like, let's wrap our minds around that.
Thank you so much to both of you. I appreciate sometimes talking about particularly what's going on in our own homes and our own families can be a really difficult and raw experience. And I'm really, really grateful to both of you for sharing those with us. Just while we have some time, I want to take a question from the audience that was asked slightly earlier by Steph. Asking, so Steph asks, I'm half Korean and queer and I don't appear Asian. I recognize that by not looking like the stereotype that many think, or recognize that Steph doesn't look like the stereotype that many people think of. What can Steph do to help bring awareness to the issue? I think we sort of started a conversation about this earlier in the session. I just wondered before we wrap up if anyone had any thoughts on this at all.
Well, first and foremost, share. Let people know, because one of the big things is that, again, just because you don't physically see it doesn't mean it's not there. I started off with mine saying my intersectionality. Quite a few of them you don't see. It's important to give people the understanding that there is others out there. It creates that bond and allows people a path. So I would definitely share. Share your story, share your experience. And what you just said there, I don't physically get identified. That by itself gives you an opportunity, right? That tells you how we judge so often by visual that we fail to realize that there's so much more behind. So, share.
Fantastic. Right. I appreciate we don't have very long. So before we wrap up, I will come to one last question because I'm really keen to hear from everyone on the panel this. I want to know, how are you celebrating the Lunar New Year this year? Erica, can I come to you first?
Yeah, absolutely. We did small New Year's Eve with my parents over the weekend, and it was great. Made food, hung out, told stories, and just shared the love around. This morning, my daughter woke up with a hongbao, a lychee under her pillow. So continuing that tradition, she's wearing her cheongsam to school today, and is very proud. And so she'll go on and talk about her heritage with others. And so that's the way that we're spreading it and celebrating it. There'll be more food later. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mike, how are you celebrating the Lunar New Year?
I was quite lucky. I was in New York like the week before, so I sort of had a big meal with my parents, my sister. I actually came out to them like when I was in my early 20s, very lucky in that sense. But yesterday, actually it's Chinese New Year, the Lunar New Year Eve, I did my tax. I finally did it. In UK, the last day to submit it was like the 31st of Jan. So that's what I actually did with my cat. And then afterwards, my friend just came back, and then there was a discount on Yawacha, which is, again, for those who live in London, you know, it's a pretty good restaurant, but Chinese, founded by Alan Yao. They had a 25% off, so I ordered food, and then went to my friends and dinner. That's it. Pretty productive, I would say.
Sounds excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. Scott, your Lunar New Year plans?
Yeah, I think it's just finding excuses to spend time with friends. Given, I think most of my family's back in Australia, and I did the usual calls and the usual greetings and so forth. That I don't necessarily follow the traditions too closely. I mean, I did wash my hair this morning, so unfortunately that's bad luck. But I just want to push the boundaries to see how much bad luck I get and sort of tally it onwards. I went to dim sum with my partner, had a hot pot. So we sort of did it a bit earlier given people's work schedules. But instead, last night I just ended up playing tennis with my friends. So it was it was great fun. So I think it was just an excuse for me to just spend time with people, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Fantastic. James, how are you celebrating your Lunar New Year?
Well, first things first, I took the day off and spending time with the family. So I'm trying to make sure that everyone understands it's normal to celebrate the way you want to. So took the day off, and again, this panel is the only panel I'm having all day for any calls, but it's worth it. But I'm spending time with my family, honestly. Most important thing, because again, it's times like this that matters throughout the year.
Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. I really, really appreciate that. And finally, last but not least, Amy, how are you celebrating the Lunar New Year?
No parties, no nothing, but I did send all my nieces and nephews a tiger from the World Wildlife Fund, that they also adopted a tiger. So they have a tiger they've adopted and a little stuffy, and that's what they got for Lunar New Year. And so we have a vegetarian Lunar New Year feast coming. We're picking up from Lucky Danger, and we went to the Lantern Festival at the Kennedy Center. So that's also was really nice.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to wrap the panel up there. I want to say a massive, massive thank you to all of our panelists who have joined us this afternoon. I appreciate really greatly. It's a fascinating, fascinating opportunity to learn more about what we can do as allies. If we're in the Asian community, what more we can do in sort of, as we just talked about, balancing, as it were, or not balancing aspects of our culture and heritage. So I'm really, really grateful to all of our panelists for giving us our time. I want to say a big thank you to Yahoo, who sponsored this session. As I said at the beginning, you can find out more about Yahoo's opportunities, jobs, events, and what they're getting up to over on their My G Work profile. We are built up by our business community, and we'd strongly encourage you to go and check it out. All of our panelists are available on My G Work if you want to connect to discuss more. And other than that, I will leave everyone to enjoy the Lunar New Year.